Hey everyone, and welcome to another AlphaZero Stockfish game. This game is quite lengthy, it's 89 moves long, and AlphaZero plays white and Stockfish 8 plays black. Played again in a London match 2018, and here we'll see AlphaZero not afraid to sacrifice pawns to gain an attack against the opponent's king. Basically in this game AlphaZero just puts Stockfish under immense pressure throughout the game, sacrifices a lot of material, so to the human eye it may look like white isn't actually winning particularly well. But to the computer, white slowly builds up a nice attack and just sort of gains the initiative eventually in the end game. So I'll play through the moves and analyse a few lines. So here AlphaZero plays d4, Stockfish plays e6, and unusually here AlphaZero plays e4, and we get into a French with knight c3, knight f6 and e5. And this has been played by Leela Chess Zero quite a number of times in games I've used. Knight fd7, f4 and c5. AlphaZero plays knight to f3 to sort of protect this d4 pawn. Knight c6 is played to attack it, and bishop e3 again to defend. This is typical French structure. Bishop e7 is played by Stockfish, and a3 now from AlphaZero, maybe preventing knight b4 ideas, maybe after bishop d3. b6 is now quite actually a rare and an unusual move for black to play here. Mainly because it seems to open up the b5 diagonal for white, but the point is that black wants to try and develop their bishop to b7. It tends to be in the French that this bishop on c8 is rather useless, and you try to drop it off for white's white squared bishop. In the game AlphaZero now plays bishop b5, so attacking this knight on c6, black defends with queen c7. Typically here now, a normal line for white would be just to castle, and maybe after a6, bishop d3, black can castle as well, and white might try to build up an attack with queen to e1. Black can actually play f5 though, and after a move like bishop f2, this is actually a really even game. So I don't blame AlphaZero for not going in for castles in this position. Instead AlphaZero now tries to dominate the dark squares, and I really like this move. He plays h4, and just trying to build up some sort of kingside counterplay and attack, because black seems to dominate the queen side with their pawns, so white's option is to attack on the other side of the board. Stockfish plays a developing move, bishop b7 as we discussed, and AlphaZero plays queen to e2, so getting their two pieces on the light squares. And the point is after a6 is what Stockfish played. AlphaZero now just wants to trade their bishop off. If bishop a4, this is quite bad for white because b5 and bishop b3. Maybe black could actually play c4 here as well to attack the bishop again, but actually the engines prefer just castling and maintaining their decent position and stronghold on that centre. After d takes c5, bishop takes c5, it's seen that black has a small advantage here, so white definitely won't want to move their bishop back in this position. So now AlphaZero opts to take one of black's best minor pieces off with bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6 is played, and AlphaZero now castles queenside, so obviously preparing to attack on the king side with all their pawns and pieces. Interestingly now Stockfish shuts down this side of the board with c4, so I think the main point is that it stops any counterplay from white with d takes c4, and black now has the option just to launch these pawns up, which is probably what a typical French player would do. The only problem is that does black really want to castle this side of the board, because white's going to start launching their pawns that side. So it may be that black's king goes to this side of the board in the actual game. And this proves to be true because AlphaZero now plays knight g5, a very sneaky move actually. So if you're black, if you castle here, this is actually really terrible because queen to h5 is just an amazing move. Threatening mate on h7. And if you play h6 here as black, you can actually play rook d f1, and white's got a nice position. If black captures this pawn, it's just suicide after h takes g5. So in this particular position, white is doing rather well because they're preparing maybe f5, maybe g4 at some point. Nice position indeed. So after knight g5, maybe thinking h6 straight away would be quite nice for black, but no. Again, there's sneaky moves with queen h5, threatening to take on f7, and the pawn can't capture on g5 due to queen takes h8. And if black plays g6, white can go in for a trade. They can play knight takes e6, attacking the queen on c7 and threatening to check the king and fork the rook at the same time. So if black moves with queen b7, white plays queen g4. After captures, white checks. After king d8, queen takes e6. White now has 3 pawns for the knight. After a few moves like b5, f5, b4, captures, and bishop takes h6, white actually has a small advantage here. Even though white's a piece for the 3 pawns, they're going to start launching these pawns at the board, and it's going to be very difficult for black to stop this. So definitely after knight g5, this is a great sneaky move by white, and black does have to be careful. But we know that Stockfish is a great defender, and it plays knight to f8 here, protecting the h7 pawn. And after queen h5 from AlphaZero attacking f7, it calmly plays bishop to d8, using the queen to protect the f7 pawn. AlphaZero now follows up their attack with rook h f1, maybe preparing f5 and g4. But Stockfish now just plays g6, AlphaZero plays queen h6, and Stockfish now defends admirably with just f5. h5 here was seen as a good move for white, preparing h takes g6 and maybe knight takes e6 ideas. But after rook g8, captures and knight a2 and a5, it's not very clear on who's got the winning chances here. Obviously white has the space advantage, but black still got a nice defence, and with the locked pawn structure in the centre, it's going to be very difficult for both sides to get an advantage. In the game after f5, AlphaZero then just took on f6, so en passant, bishop takes f6, and they drop the knight back to f3, maybe manoeuvring it to e5 at a later date. Stockfish now castles queenside, and rook de1 is played, so this e-file is now open for white to take advantage of, and that's exactly what AlphaZero tries to do. After king b7, bishop d2, so they've gained the open file, and now black has a really bad long-term disadvantage. This e5 square is very weak, and white's got 2 pawns to cover it, and obviously black has this backward e6 pawn, which could come under threat. At the moment the f8 knight does a good job of defending it, but obviously long term black doesn't want to keep that knight there. So in the game queen e7 is played, maybe attacking h4 with 2 pieces. So white plays h5, just getting more space, threatening h takes g6 perhaps. Rook e8 now to defend this a6 pawn even more, and I've just highlighted in red that eventually white could just jump a piece into this e5 square and have a nice advantage. The problem is that the bishop on f6 covers it, so obviously if white drops a knight in there, black will probably just take it. So white's got to be a bit patient. Rook e2 is played by AlphaZero, queen f7 from Stockfish, and rook fe1 now, doubling the rooks in the e-file. Stockfish plays knight d7, and after this move AlphaZero just seems to change plan. They play rook h1, focusing fire on this h-file for the time being, and after knight b8, rook e1, it seems that AlphaZero's backed off this e-file idea, so changing plan completely. Queen g8 is played by Stockfish, and now knight e2, knight d7 from Stockfish, and finally AlphaZero jumps the knight into e5. Stockfish plays bishop g7 attacking the queen, and queen g5 is played. So what happens if Stockfish takes this knight now with knight takes e5? Well, after d takes, this actually just aids white, because after g takes h5, queen takes h5, white's plan is simply to play bishop c3 and a move like knight d4. White will have quite a comfortable game because this c6 bishop is rather passive at the moment, with all of black's pawns on white coloured squares. So black wouldn't want to go in for this type of thing. In the game after queen g5, bishop f6 is played by Stockfish attacking the queen. The queen drops back to g4, and Stockfish reroutes their bishop to d8. Queen h3, giving their queen more scope, so it can go along in this third rank, and it also protects h5 and even threatens now h takes g6. So Stockfish finally captures this knight on e5, And I think AlphaZero played the right move here. D takes e5 is preferable because now it gives this knight space to jump into d4, maybe even bishop c3 as we discussed. But the problem is now Stockfish does actually have two quite nice bishops. Stockfish plays bishop to e7. AlphaZero gets on with their plan of bishop c3, maybe knight d4. And g5 is played by Stockfish, and g3 just to cover g takes f4 ideas. But Stockfish gains a bit more space with g4 attacking the queen. The queen drops back to h2, and black plays bishop to c5. So Stockfish here does actually have two very nice bishops. Typically we see AlphaZero with these type of positions, so they've got to be quite careful. At the moment this bishop on c6 eyes up this h1 rook, so for this reason AlphaZero jumps it into f1 to get out the firing line. And it's got to be said that both sides have quite an equal game now. Stockfish plays queen f7, and finally AlphaZero jumps their other knight into d4 with a nice outpost for the knight. And I'm guessing Stockfish won't want to capture this knight because then the drawing chances are increased significantly with the opposite coloured bishops. But actually white would probably have an advantage if this happens. Rook h f8 is played, and now AlphaZero plays an incredibly great move, I reckon. They break on the king side with f5, but what this actually does is targets the black king, as we'll see. So f takes e6 is now a threat, and maybe even f6 pushing. So Stockfish captures on d4. We discussed this a minute ago, saying it would be bad for black to do this, but now actually after f5 there's some more open lines for the white squared bishop. Bishop takes d4 is played by AlphaZero, and e takes f5. So we see AlphaZero giving up material to gain some open lines. And the point is AlphaZero wanted to play queen g1, so now they're targeting this b6 pawn, and it forces black to push b5. So a weakness on the g1 to a7 diagonal, right next to the black king, is created, and now it's just up to AlphaZero to shuffle their queen and bishop around to attack the king. So for starters they play bishop c5 attacking the rook. Stockfish plays rook g8 retreating it, and after queen d4, if black now takes this pawn h5 this would be terrible because rook h1. After queen g5 king b1 h5, white can gain an advantage with moves like e6, and after rook g6 e7 this is actually better for white. And there's literally no way for Stockfish to take this pawn on e7, it's just covered by the c5 bishop, and with opposite coloured bishops white now has a nice space advantage. So in the game after queen d4, queen e6 is actually played by Stockfish. After bishop b4, bishop d7, bishop d2 and queen c6, AlphaZero now has a chance to play bishop to e3, again to attack this diagonal, but AlphaZero realises it's not enough compensation. And as Matthew Sadler writes in his Game Changer book, AlphaZero actually prefers to attack with an open file against the opponent's king and an open diagonal against the opponent's king, plus a restricted king equals an advantage. So basically we've got the open diagonal and the restricted king, but we've got no open file. And for this reason now AlphaZero plays e6, opening up the e file once again, sacrificing more material for dynamic play. Just going back, I wonder how many of us would actually play e6 in this position. It makes perfect sense though to open more black squares for the bishop and the queen. But how many of us would love to give up material here? I doubt very few of us would actually play this. But e6 is played by AlphaZero, and Stockfish of course just captures, bishop e3, threatening queen a7 check, and rook a8 covers the a7 square, and now just bishop f2. So again, white now has the open e file for their rook. So everything is in place now for AlphaZero to attack. The problem is though that black does have extra material, so Stockfish does have quite an active defence to play with their pawns. So Stockfish plays a5, maybe preparing b4 ideas and some counterplay. Rook e2 though from AlphaZero, and rook a6, and the point is after rook fe1 and rook e8, Stockfish is basically trying to blockade the e file with this e6 bishop and just focus all their pieces on it. h6 gains more space for AlphaZero. Queen d7 and Queen g7. So Queen g7 is actually a bit of a trick, because if Queen takes g7, Pawn takes g7, this pawn is rather unstoppable for black, because basically these two rooks gang up on this overloaded bishop, and after captures twice to sacrifice an exchange, white can just push to g8 and get a queen. So after Queen g7, Stockfish plays rook to e7, attacking the queen, and doesn't allow a queen trade, and Queen f6 from AlphaZero, and black actually now gains some active counterplay with b4. AlphaZero just ignores this and plays Queen d4, so maintaining this long-term threat and this diagonal, and just leaves this rook to defend everything. So it's defending this a5 pawn for now, and also this a7 square. And you'll see later in the game that this rook actually gets really passive from defending so much. Queen d6 is played, so maybe black's threatening to play b takes a3 twice. If we just take a moment to breathe, we'll just see the points of white's position. Just look at how active these two rooks are against black's rooks. Very passive, and this bishop is really active as well with this queen, and white does have a long-term advantage, and this bishop on e6 is also very passive for black. But the only counterplay it does have is that Stockfish is a few pawns up, and we'll just see how the game proceeds from now on. King b1 is played by AlphaZero, Queen c7 from Stockfish, and now bishop to e3 from AlphaZero, maybe trying to play bishop to f4 ideas. It also looks like white's just given up a pawn on g3, so what happens if queen takes g3 here? Well, this is actually really risky due to bishop g5, and if rook e8, rook takes e6 can be played, and if captures, let's say rook a takes, then just queen d5, and of course white's just won material, because if rook c6, obviously rook takes e8 can be played. So this queen takes g3 would not lead to any advantage for black. Instead of the bishop to e3, Stockfish now decides to open lines up with b takes a3, opening up the b file. The point is that Stockfish hopes white will play b takes a3, because then it can play f4. If the bishop takes f4, play queen b6 and just trade off queens, and Stockfish really wants to do this, and it will ease up their defence quite significantly. But AlphaZero doesn't want to give up queens that easily. Instead they play king a2, and after king a8 they play rook b1, so they're trying to gain this open b file now. Queen c8 is played by Stockfish, and c3 is played by AlphaZero, stopping any c3 pushing ideas. And if black now plays a takes b2, amazingly white can win with rook e to b2, and yeah, white's just winning this game after opening up this b file and doubling the rooks. Bishop f4 is threatened, queen e5 is threatened, and also this rook b8 idea is unstoppable, so black could very easily resign in this position. So black has given white quite an advantage with these dynamic pieces. So for this reason Stockfish plays rook b7, defending this b file. B takes a3 is played, and now rook b3 from Stockfish. AlphaZero plays a4, stopping black from playing a4 themselves and solidifying this rook, so that was a very good move. Bishop d7 to attack a4, but rook d2, and now queen takes d5 is threatened. Stockfish trades rooks on b1 and plays bishop takes a4. AlphaZero attacks the bishop with rook to a2, and queen e8 defends, but this also allows queen takes d5 now check. Stockfish blocks with bishop c6, and queen c5 is played, maybe threatening to take on a5 with these two pieces. Queen e4 check is played by Stockfish, king a1, queen h1 check, and bishop g1 to block, and Stockfish takes his pawn on h6. AlphaZero plays rook h2, the queen's forced to e6, bishop e3 to block the queen off, and queen d7, so the queen's basically trying to gain entry into this first rank, but white doesn't want this, so they play rook d2. After queen e8, we'll just take a minute to breathe and just have a look at assess this position. So still this rook on a6 is rather passive, it's still protecting this pawn on a5, and this actually eventually wins the game for white. Even though black's picks up the h6 pawn, this doesn't alter the long-term situation. Basically it's up to the black queen to stop the rook from infiltrating these open files, and without this rook on a6 to help out, black's actually helpless to stop white's attack. Essentially white's sacrificed pawns have opened up the files for their tremendous rook, and basically white's just got better placed pieces, especially this queen on c5, which is beautifully placed. As we'll see now, rook d6, so putting more pressure on this c6 bishop. King b7 is played, king b2 from AlphaZero, and queen b8, maybe threatening a discovered attack, so king a2, queen c8, and everything's protected once again. So AlphaZero goes back and maybe tries to infiltrate the B file instead. Queen e8 is played and king a3. And just note that actually AlphaZero is trying to put their king in an ideally placed and protected position before they finish off black. So again, just note how AlphaZero also likes the king to be safe before they finish off their opponent. King a8 is played by Stockfish. Bishop g5, so threatening rook to d8 check. Very nice move. Queen e1, threatening queen a1, so king a2 from AlphaZero. Queen e4 from Stockfish, and again bishop e3, so maybe threatening ideas like rook d1 here, which could really finish off black. So queen e8 is played, rook d6 once again, and king b7 and king a3, so we're in a very similar position as before. Queen h8 attacking c3, and now bishop d4 defending, attacking the queen at the same time. Queen e8, rook f6, and just note that if queen e1 here, black actually loses. So if black tries once again to infiltrate this first rank, white can finish off with rook f7, king c8, queen takes f5 check, king d8 and queen f6, king c8, rook f8, and we get into this long endgame. Bishop e8, queen takes a6, king d8, and white actually has a forced checkmate with queen d6, king c8 and queen c6. Again, that bishop's pinned. After king d8, bishop f6, and queen e7 check. So white finishes off very nicely with king b2 moving away. After a move like a4, white can play rook to e8 because this queen is pinned. So after rook f6, white's rook has now infiltrated black's position. Stockfish tries to give material back with f4. G takes f4 is played by AlphaZero, but it's probably too little too late now. Queen d7, rook d6, and queen c7. AlphaZero plays f5, bishop d7 is played by Stockfish. AlphaZero plays queen c7, and black's passive pieces have finally materialised into a one endgame for AlphaZero. King takes c7, and finally AlphaZero plays rook takes a6 and just wins a rook. Bishop takes f5 is played. After rook f6, bishop c2 and king b2, AlphaZero wins and Stockfish resigns because it's a lost endgame. So let's just quickly go through that again. So after rook d6 attacking the queen, queen c7 is played. After f5, Stockfish is forced to play bishop to d7. And there aren't really a lot of moves available for black here, such as if queen e7, white can play rook takes c6, and if queen takes c5, just play rook takes c5, and again white wins material. And where else can black go? If something like rook a8, let's say, they're just f6 and white's just launching this pawn up the board and going to queen themselves a new queen. If rook a6 again, rook e6 is just a very nice move, threatening rook e7. If bishop d7, again we get queen takes c7, king takes, and rook a6. So in this position, black's passive pieces are just overloaded and white's just got a nice one position. So AlphaZero's winning plan basically stemmed from this f5 move, where after bishop takes d4 and bishop takes d4, e takes f5, white begins with queen g1 attacking this pawn and just creating some space. And after bishop c5 and a couple of moves, just getting their pieces into really nice positions, as we'll quickly see, opening up the files, and black's just got very passive pieces, even though there are extra pawns up. We'll just see quickly that white just gains nice counterplay, has dynamic piece play, and black's pieces are just incredibly passive. Even after swapping the rooks off, we'll see black just gets outmaneuvered by white's nicely placed pieces, and everything's covered off, and it's quite simple for AlphaZero actually eventually. So after a couple of moves, yeah, white just finds himself in a nice position. Stockfish gives up material, and just after this move, just it's game over. So again, that was a lovely game by AlphaZero, and just shows again that you can sacrifice material to gain some dynamic piece play, and it seems to be the meta of chess now to do this. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please drop a like or subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more in the future, and hopefully I'll do another AlphaZero Stockfish game in a couple of days for you. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, everyone.